Yeah, I honestly don't know how I held on. He did a good job of pulling out of it, I guess, at the right moment because I was clenched and like holding on to it as close as I could, and it was really insane to kind of see the progression. I mean, obviously, with more G's, essentially your blood flow is being pulled down towards your legs, which kind of causes you to black out. And so it was just so interesting to see kind of the tunneling come as we like turned into the turn, and then right as he turned out, it just slowly went right back out like nothing had happened. And so it's really fascinating, honestly, just the amount of cool things that humans are able to withstand and all the cool things we were able to accomplish.
Welcome, everyone, back to the Sean Trey Show. I have a really awesome guest with me today, and I would just like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Alyssa. I am an astrobiologist. I have been interested in space ever since I was a little girl, and really started getting involved in space research at a pretty young age, and hopes of building up my dream of working in the space industry. So now I'm currently a PhD student in space and planetary science, and doing research along with that towards my PhD, and continuing to build a resume and hopefully applying to the astronaut selection process at some point and kind of seeing where that takes me, but eventually ending up in research within the space industry.
Very awesome. What started you down this path? What was the thing that for you was the catalyst? For me, I'm not in space, but I still have a love for space. And the thing that was like started me down that path was I was a little kid and the movie Space Camp came out. I'm pretty old, but it was such my whole generation was really into it. And then, I remember once my parents took me out to Cape Canaveral to watch the shuttle launch. And when I was there watching the shuttle launch, it was just like a spark was lit. And then ended up going to space camp, and it was such an amazing experience there. But what kicked off things for you that started you down this path?
Yeah, I kind of always had an interest in space. No one in my family really worked in the space industry or anything science or anything related. But my dad kind of remembered me coming and asking questions about space, like what is space or do people even go there? Very like basic questions. And looking back, our best guess is that it came from the Backyardigans, which was like a cartoon that was on Nickelodeon all the time. And I had a poster for a Mission to Mars episode. And that really is just the only place we can even think of back then as to where I would have heard the word Mars, heard the word space, because we definitely weren't talking about it in school. So that really is our best guess as to where kind of those initial questions started coming from. From then on, I was asking for books and videos and posters and just kind of very obsessed with just the idea of space. And we ended up driving past the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama.
Yeah.
And I was actually with my grandmother, and she knew I liked space. So she thought, might as well stop and let Alyssa see the rockets or whatever they have there. And so we went and visited like their visitor center, and that I just had so much fun there. And I brought home a brochure for space camp and did all the things of wanting to go. And eventually my dad brought me, we did like a family version of space camp. So the two of us went when I was 7. And, from then on, it was just, I was obsessed with space, especially after that first space camp. I was basically like answering all the questions that I had been having about space and finally being kind of immersed with other people who were interested in space. I think that really kind of ignited more questions and more want for wanting to do something space related.
It's amazing. And it's like, it's amazing that, those seeds were planted and then that you stuck with it. A lot of people have a hard time committing to a journey. What was it that you learned about yourself by committing to this journey, and how has it shaped you today?
Yeah, I think that I just kind of always had an underlining interest in space, and that was a bit vague. I think that there are so many directions that I could have gone. Even though space sounds very like definitive, it really wasn't in a way. I think that there were still so many different paths that I could have taken and so many different routes that I could have gone that I guess it didn't feel very limiting in the time, which I think, like you're saying, a lot of people are very nervous to fully commit or, focus on one topic. But I think it just didn't feel that way. And I had an interest in it and it just kind of kept building. And I think that anytime I took a step on narrowing it down, it was always because I had like finally figured out that that next step was what I was interested in. So it just felt more of like a natural progression. And each step was really taken by making sure I was really interested in what I was doing next. And so I think it was just really slow paths that led that way. And honestly, I can't imagine doing anything else. So pretty, pretty content with where it led me.
That's awesome. It's like I love that there was a great Steve Jobs speech where he talks about like all of these little things that led up to where he ended up. And sometimes you can't see that all these little steps are adding up to this larger whole. And so you just keep going. And you're right. There really is this just logical progression that, I started here and now I'm here. Well, how did I get here? And you try to trace it back and you can't really trace it back because it was just like this stream of events that led there. But, there is this idea of committing to kind of the journey and seeing where the rabbit hole leads. So it's good. It's fun like that. But what did your parents do to support you on this journey? You here are this young individual who's sitting there going, "Yeah, this space is interesting." But there must have been some really positive support from your parents to kind of nurture that. What did they do to kind of keep you on this path, or at least allow you to explore that path?
Yeah, I think that when I first had interest in space, I don't think, my dad or my family really understood that it would be something I commit to for, what I actually want to pursue as a career. So I think originally they were like, oh, cute, she likes space. I guess we'll buy her a poster or, get her this book
Right.
or something. And that just kind of was natural, was that and princesses and whatever else may come up. And so they just thought it was kind of part of my interests. And then I think that once my dad was able to kind of like go with me to space camp and see how interested I was and how engaged I was and asking questions and all these things, I think he started to kind of maybe piece together that maybe I was more interested in this than other things. And so I think that led him to wanting to see what I was wanting to do with it or what I was interested in. And, I think my dad had a little interest in space when he was younger, but hadn't really thought about it in a long time. And so I think he enjoyed also learning a bit more about the space industry. And so it just kind of continued on like that, where, yeah, we just slowly got more and more into it without, I think, really even realizing because he was supportive of my interest in space. And then eventually we just, I guess, took that turn where I was for sure going to go and do something in the space industry.
That's awesome. As you are, you said that you're saying, what are you studying actually, by the way? What is your PhD in? Because that's actually really interesting as well.
Yeah, so technically it's going to be in space and planetary science, but my research focus is still within astrobiology. So astrobiology is kind of the core of all the different things that I do. And specifically right now, I'm looking for potential past life on Mars. So when we look at signs of life, mostly we're looking for bacterial life. So nothing too complicated, but bacteria are pretty resistant and really my area lies with the methane production that's been kind of discovered on Mars. So some of the rovers have detected levels of methane in a certain area of Mars, which is a bit odd since we think that methane should have dissipated by now. So there should be some sort of process maybe producing that methane or had produced it under the surface. So that could be something geological, or I'm also looking at obviously the biological side of it because the majority of the methane on Earth is produced by biologicals. So if it's, if some sort of biological that used to live on Mars produced a lot of this and maybe it's just been stuck under the surface and slowly coming out or those sorts of ideas. So we look at different species that are able to survive in Mars pressure and Mars environments and just different conditions like that.
That's actually awesome. And hopefully, you get accepted to the space program and you go to space. What would you like to do as an astronaut? What would be some of the things that you think would be absolutely amazing to do with your background and with all of this?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, research. I mean, I think that it was something that I don't think I really fully understood if I liked it or didn't like it. It's kind of like a push and pull. Like sometimes it's really cool and exciting, and then other times it's like extremely boring when you get kind of in a slump or stuck on a certain project. So I think it kind of took me a while to really see or understand like my appreciation for a lot of the research that goes into the space community. So definitely some sort of research, and it really just kind of depends on where we are in the space industry and what context everything kind of falls into by the time, either I'm accepted or, what sort of missions are going on. Obviously, the space industry is constantly evolving, so it's kind of a little difficult to keep up with. But I think that I would really just be happy to participate in any of the projects that they do. The International Space Station, for one, has been like an amazing research laboratory for all sorts of experiments and gaining a lot of knowledge. So I think it just really depends on where we're at. If we're at the point of going back to the moon, going to Mars, or really what's happening will kind of, I think, shift a little bit of where that research lies, but just something along those.
That's awesome. Again, like just being part of it would be awesome. I'm sure, because there is, and it's a field that changes so rapidly. Space travel is changing at amazing speeds right now, and there's all types of different innovations that are going on, and it's amazing to see where we're headed and to try to guess where things are shifting. But I'm sure there's a lot of excitement from your side about this idea, this possibility of being involved in these things. But you said that sometimes you're not so sure. How do you stay excited when the days when it's not as easy to see the vision or keep the vision?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I kind of go through that every day with a PhD. I think
Right,
it
right.
is definitely a cycle that you kind of fall into where things go really well, or sometimes it feels like I'll be stuck pursuing a PhD for, 20 years. It just kind of depends on the day. But, I think that one thing that was kind of recommended to me and I think is super important was when I was even considering any sort of grad school. I was really told to, don't worry about what school you're going to or really the program. Just focus on what research you're going to be interested in. And I think that I made a really good decision in choosing a research topic that I really enjoy and I'm really excited to pursue. Because if I was just doing any project just to get the check, then, I think it does get too boring where you don't really have the passion or the interest to really push yourself to get through those lumps. And so I think that just having an interest in the topic has done me well so far, and just kind of trying to push through those slower periods or where things aren't working. I know that there's like a greater objective there. And, typically with research, there's always going to be pivots along the way. So I think that that is super important. I think so much of the time we can kind of get caught up in like, oh, just we're taking the next step, but maybe not actually thinking about what that means or what you're actually getting into. And it was really challenging at first because I actually wanted to do a master's and so I had applied to all these different schools under the assumption that I was going to do a master's, and then the guy who I really wanted to work with was only accepting PhD students. And he told me about the benefits of pursuing a PhD and trying to kind of sway me into it. And that was a big, time commitment versus doing a master's. But I think it really started to make more sense in my head, especially now that I'm 2 years into it, where it's just the time commitment is going to be there just because to get really productive and valued research accomplished, it's going to take time no matter what it is. And so I'm really glad that I'm kind of have a little bit more time to get something done. So I think there's a lot of excitement, even though it's not always moving very quickly. There's always kind of those exciting things of having a paper or getting results. So I think the good kind of outweighs the bad in that sense to kind of push you forward.
I love that. And one of the things that you mentioned too is like when you're doing anything, there's always the possibility of pivoting. And I think that, one of the things that I've been working with Ailani is teaching her that, sometimes we do have to pivot in life. And, because again, like you said in research, I've come from a background in media and production. And one of the funny things is that we would always, when you do something, something might turn out well, it might turn out badly. And however it turns, you just go, okay, well, let's go to our new angle. Let's do a new direction. And that power of learning that is something that, I think is a good skill to have.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I think with at any case, being able to kind of pivot or change directions is really important. I mean, astrobiology definitely was not, what I was saying I was interested in doing when I was really young. I had no idea what astrobiology was or what it entailed, but I think that was all part of the process of really figuring out what area of space I liked and then constantly kind of changing to a new direction or a new path to figure out what I liked the most.
That's awesome. Well, you've trained as a pilot, an aquanaut, and more. What's one experience that truly made you feel like you're ready for space?
Oh, that is really hard. I mean, I would definitely say that some of the microgravity flights that I've done definitely feel the most like you're going to space, right? So, doing some of those microgravity campaigns and getting the sense of floating, I think makes you really feel like you're an astronaut, even if each time it's only for like 20 seconds. You really get the sense of being in microgravity. So, I think that was one that was really exciting. And well, I did one microgravity flight that was more for like research purposes, and then one that was more for fun. So it was really cool to kind of experience both sides of it, of, where I was floating, but I was also very focused on kind of like the mission at hand and like what I needed to be doing. And then I also had the other experience of floating, but then also being able to like do a front flip and have a
That's
little bit
rad.
more fun with it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of really cool to kind of see those two differences. And then I think the other thing was whenever I got the opportunity to fly with the Thunderbirds, they had invited
Ooh.
me on a flight and we did all sorts of crazy stuff. They were doing all sorts of twirls and spins and things like that. But we did a 9G turn. And
Wow.
so it simulates 9Gs. So that would essentially be nine of you sitting on top of you. And then, of course, we had to wear a G suit and they taught me how to breathe through the 9G turn and kind of all these different steps. And my vision tunneled to about the size of a bottle cap, was about all
Oh,
I
wow.
had. But I did not black out, and I after that I was like, well, if I cannot black out at 9Gs, then I feel pretty prepared for a lot of the experiences of launching in a rocket off to space. It can't get too much more extreme than that. So I think that was really cool, and also earning a lot of respect for them for also flying a plane while doing that.
That's awesome. It's bright and flying a plane while doing it. And I remember once when I was actually at Space Camp and we went on the little spinning 3G simulator. And it was, you're trying to lift your arm off the wall and it just it flops back. And it's just really wild. Like that's just 3Gs. I can only imagine nine, and they're flying a plane. And congratulations for not passing out. I
Thank you.
have this love of watching those videos of pilot training, and it's not easy to do, and people black out all the time. So that's absolutely awesome.
Yeah, I honestly don't know how I held on. He did a good job of pulling out of it, I guess, at the right moment because I was clenched and like holding on to it as close as I could, and it was really insane to kind of see the progression. I mean, obviously, with more G's, essentially your blood flow is being pulled down towards your legs, which kind of causes you to black out. And so it was just so interesting to see kind of the tunneling come as we like turned into the turn. And then right as he turned out, it just slowly went right back out like nothing had happened. And so it's really fascinating, honestly, just the amount of cool things that humans are able to withstand and all the cool things we were able to accomplish.
Well, that's awesome. Well, and it kind of plays into my next question. Like these things are not easy. Like a person who wants to become a pilot. Great, yeah, that's fun. But then you're going to have to deal with some challenges of that. Like learning how to deal with G forces. Every big dream comes with these challenges. Can you share with me a time that you had to overcome something hard and what that challenge was and what it taught you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there have been plenty of challenges. I think a lot of like questioning what I really wanted to pursue or if something's worth it or worth the effort or worth the time into it. Whenever I decided I got my pilot's license while I was in high school and I was doing that. And when I started it, I actually went to my first lesson and I despised it. And I told my dad that I was never going back and never going to do it again. And he kind of pushed me a little bit to give it one more chance. Like maybe it was just a bad day or a bumpy day or something like that. And I went again and I absolutely loved it. So I'm really glad that he kind of pushed me a little bit into kind of continuing. But I think that there's always like doubt with some things and deciding if it's the right decision or going along the right path. And so I think that there's a lot of that happens where it's just, questioning whether the amount of time you're putting into something is really worth it. And I think that can be really scary because we value time so much. And to be honest, so many of these things are so time consuming, whether it's the license or even doing the PhD. I mean, a lot of them are just so much effort and so much of yourself is being like poured into them. So I think that a lot of time I've always been kind of like weary of making sure it's the right decision or the right thing that I want to be pursuing. So I think that it's just been very like meticulous and I guess the different decisions that I'm making and really thinking them through in order to like feel very confident that that's the direction that I want to go. Um, and I think that's led to a lot of really cool things. And I've been very fortunate for being able to kind of balance a lot of these things with school and otherwise. But yeah, I think that's been kind of one of the hardest parts is deciding on which things to pursue and what I'm kind of interested in. And then also kind of balancing those with everyday school, not only high school, but going to college and balancing these things and just making sure that kind of my time is being like put in the right places, whether that would be for school or things that are more extracurricular.
Well, it leads to my next question. It's like you've got a lot on your plate. How do you stay grounded? How do you stay balanced when you have all this stuff going on? How do you take care of yourself in the middle of it all?
Yeah, I think that, my dad did a really good job at instilling a lot of that when I was younger. He knew of my interests in space. And so he kind of used that as a way to kind of teach me time management in a way of like, oh, like maybe do your homework early. So that way, if something kind of cool comes up, like some sort of science event, then we can go and do that rather than spending the whole weekend doing homework that you've known about for a while. And so, kind of slowly building some of these skills, I knew that, kind of getting some things out the way that were kind of quicker and easier could maybe open up for something more fun later that came up and kind of slowly building that balance. It sounds like my life was very engulfed in space, but for in reality, it wasn't as dramatic as it sounds. I also did soccer and piano and ballet and had plenty of other interests growing up. And so I think, my dad did a really good job of encouraging my interests, but also allowing me to go and do all these other things that like my friends were doing and being involved. And I think that's what's kind of helped with my interest in space staying there because I wasn't surrounded in it 24/7. I wasn't always talking about space. So whenever I did have the opportunity to do something that was space related, it was exciting because that was like my dedicated time to do it before I came back to kind of my normal life and just normal classes and friends and sleepovers and whatever else it would be. And so they always felt very like separated, and I think that was very important kind of starting young, and that's something that I feel like I've held all the way until now where kind of things that are more space related feel very distinct and separate from kind of my more day-to-day life. And so I think that's kind of where the balance comes in, and having time for myself is kind of almost built in place with having those kind of degrees of separation. So I think it's something that was somehow taught in there of kind of separating the things out. But I think it's been really for the best of separating, almost like working normal life.
That's totally understandable. Yeah, it is there is this, well, it makes me feel as a father of a daughter who is trying to guide her on a path of being, the best version of herself. It reminds me of like the importance of a parent kind of guiding their child in those steps, because there are times where it's like, your experience studying flying for the first time. You're like, as a parent, you sit there and say, I do think this is a good idea. But, maybe it didn't click the first time. But also, making sure that we are modeling, taking time to rest, taking time for balance and other things. It makes me feel happy to hear that, hear that some of the stuff that I'm trying to do is what has helped you as you've grown. Um, what does what are your next steps? Like, as you start looking toward the future, if you've got your research going on, what are some of the things that you're really looking forward to do over the next couple years?
Yeah, I'm almost a little stagnant, I guess, at the moment because I'm pretty kind of locked in place until kind of the PhD thing kind of goes. But, I'm 2 years into it and basically going to be working on it until one day it's complete enough, I guess, is
Yeah,
the goal there. Not necessarily finished, but just good enough for completion. So I think that's kind of some of the next steps as far as eligibility in terms of like applying to the selection process. Since the new requirement requires you to have a master's, they essentially equate that to 2 years into a PhD. So, kind of after the next couple of months, I'll be technically eligible to send in an application, which is kind of like an exciting step to kind of be at, especially since I've thought about the idea of applying as an astronaut since I was really young. And so that's kind of really cool. But the selection process kind of is a bit wild. There's no timeline on it. It just kind of opens when it opens. It's basically just whenever they're in need of new astronauts. So there's really no telling when that next selection process will open or when it will be. So kind of nice to know that I will be able to send in an application, but just kind of who knows when that will be. I'm not sure. So just kind of seeing where that takes. And then also in the next few years, I mean, looking long term, kind of post PhD, the two main routes are working in industry or staying within academia. And so those are kind of my big question marks of whether I'd want to continue research as like a postdoc somewhere and maybe go to a different university and kind of stay within a similar framework or switch over to industry. And do still research, but just more on like a company level. So I think it just kind of depends on what all is happening and what kind of companies are kind of interested in similar research topics and also kind of where the field of astrobiology leads. There's a lot up in the air. We finally have a few more astrobiology related missions happening soon, which is
yeah,
very exciting and very cool to actually see it getting some sort of like big recognition with some big missions. So Europa Clipper will be a exciting thing to kind of get data for, and I think that'll kind of change a little bit of kind of where those research interests lie.
that's awesome. If you could go back in time and give some advice to your younger self, what advice would you give to a younger version of you?
Yeah, I think that I would really tell myself to one, not be quite so locked in on like one exact path. I think that, especially when I was really young, it felt very just like one, two, three. And that, you do this step and you do this step, and so that happens. And whereas life kind of flows so much more, right? You kind of get
Yeah,
pushed in one direction and bounce around a little bit more. And there are so many things that I never would have guessed, where I would have ended up, or, even pursuing a PhD now never would have been within my timeline and when I was younger. So I think that I would have kind of tried to teach myself to relax a little bit on such like timelines or such, one path. I got very locked in on certain ideas that I thought would be best, but those definitely swayed over time. And so I think that would kind of be my advice. Is just kind of let go and kind of see where things take me a little bit more. But I guess she figures it out eventually.
Right. Eventually. Well, awesome. Now, where can people look for more information about you and your story?
Yeah, so all of my stuff is under NASA Blueberries. So any sort of social media. Every now and then I try to post little updates on whether some of my PhD stuff, some research stuff, sometimes some space updates. It's kind of, just almost like a diary of some of the cool things that I've been able to do. And it's been fun to kind of share and show other young girls and also young kids like what those different space jobs look like. And so, when I was younger saying, I wanted to go in the space industry, I didn't know what these jobs look like. And so I always love
Yeah.
being able to kind of post online and people to see like what does working in a lab look like? What does simulating a Mars chamber look like? And so being able to kind of share some of those things is a lot of fun.